The field integrity log for cell 17 showed the first anomaly at the 4-minute mark. I didn't catch it then. I was running the standard biometric sweep, watching the output scroll across my secondary screen, and the 0.3% degradation flag registered as instrument noise. The polymer containment fields at Drellin 12 had held 207 species over 19 years of continuous operation. A 0.3% variance was not a threshold event. I marked it ambient and kept working. The human was sitting on the provided platform, reading the printed document she had requested at intake. Flat paper, black text. She'd asked for it the way you'd ask for water, matter-of-factly, as though she expected it to be available. We'd printed it. She'd been reading it for most of the morning. She looked up once when I entered the monitoring bay adjacent to her cell, registered me through the observation panel, and went back to her page. Her name in the intake record was Carrier Mara, 41 years old, classified as a civilian attaché detained during a border irregularity. She had been cooperative through processing, polite during orientation, and entirely unbothered by Cell 17's architecture, which most detainees find at minimum uncomfortable. The polymer field is visible at certain angles, a faint iridescent shimmer where the containment lattice meets the air. Several species attempt to avoid proximity with it on instinct. Carrier Mara had set her platform directly beside the nearest field boundary and leaned her back against the wall 2 centimeters from the shimmer. She had apparently not noticed it, or had noticed it and decided it was not worth moving for. At the 11-minute mark, the log flagged a second degradation event, 1.1%. I pulled the raw feed and looked at it properly this time. The readings were clean. No instrument fault, no power fluctuation, no environmental contamination in the cell atmosphere. The polymer matrix was degrading, slowly, steadily, in a narrow band along the wall segment nearest to the human's seated position. I called Technician Orensal into the monitoring bay and showed him the feed without comment. He studied it for a long moment, then suggested the panel coupling on that segment had developed a microfault and recommended we run a diagnostic on the field emitter array. I told him to run it. He did. The array returned fully nominal. The degradation reading, during the 12 minutes it took him to complete the diagnostic, had climbed to 2.8%. I put in a priority request for field analyst Kareth Vaunessa. She arrived from the upper block 14 minutes later, still pulling on her monitoring gloves. I handed her the log without preamble. She read it standing at my console. I watched her expression move through the same sequence mine had. Ambient dismissal, then a careful stillness, then the particular quality of attention that field analysts develop over years of looking at data that doesn't behave. She asked me to pull the cell atmosphere composition. I pulled it. She asked me to pull the human's intake biometrics, resting cardiac rate, dermal conductivity index, baseline neural discharge profile. I pulled those too. She was quiet for a moment after reading them. Her dermal conductivity index, she said. Yes. The human bioelectric output, the passive electrochemical signature that living human tissue produces at rest, without exertion, without any deliberate activity, was logging at a level our instruments were not calibrated to express in standard units. Not elevated in any alarming sense. Not a spike, not a discharge event. Simply a baseline. Simply what human skin does when a human being sits in a room and reads a piece of paper. The polymer lattice comprising the Cell 17 containment field had been engineered across 4 decades of Viethary biometric research. It was molecularly keyed to the electrochemical profiles of 207 cataloged species. It could distinguish between a Sorith-class heavy-density detainee and a Velthan atmospheric adaptation variant at the submolecular level and hold both without adjustment. It had never been tested against a species whose resting bioelectric output fell entirely outside the range the engineering team had considered possible for carbon-based biology. The lattice was not being broken. It was not being pushed or burned or overwhelmed. It was dissolving. The human's baseline output was molecularly incompatible with the polymer's binding chemistry in a way that produced slow, consistent, passive degradation. The way certain mineral compounds will dissolve a specific metal if you simply leave them in contact long enough. No force required. No intention required. Only presence. At the 31-minute mark, field integrity had reached 68.4% and was declining at a rate of approximately 1.2% per minute. Carrier, Mara turned a page. I authorized manual evacuation protocol at 31.6% and keyed the intercom to the cell. Miss Carrier, I said, we're concluding today's assessment session. Please remain in place while the monitoring team prepares the transition. She looked up from her document. She had been reading the same page for some time. Not slowly, I thought, but rereading. Checking something against something else she remembered. Is there a problem with the room? She said. Her tone was the same tone she had used to request the printed document. Mild, informational. The session has reached its scheduled endpoint, I said. She looked at me for a moment through the observation panel. I had the brief, unpleasant sense that she was deciding how much of this to believe. Then she set the document on the platform beside her, folded her hands in her lap, and waited. The transition team entered through the auxiliary corridor at 29.2% field integrity. They transferred her to a standard gravity hold unit. No polymer chemistry, no lattice substrate, simple mechanical architecture, and she walked with them without comment. At the cell door, she paused and looked back at me through the panel. I didn't finish the last section, she said. I'll have it available for you, I said. She nodded once and went with the team. Field analyst Vanessa and I stood in the monitoring bay afterward and looked at the integrity log together. The degradation curve was clean and continuous from the 4-minute mark to the point of evacuation. No acceleration, no variability. A straight, patient line going down. She didn't do anything, Warrensall said. He was standing behind us, looking at the same screen. His voice had the quality of someone restating a fact in order to believe it. No, I said. She was just sitting there. Yes. I filed the incident report that evening. In the summary section, I wrote that the Cell 17 containment field had experienced full structural compromise through passive bioelectric contact with the human detainee, with no volitional act on the detainee's part contributing to or accelerating the degradation event. I wrote that the Vietheri polymer lattice architecture, in its current form, should be considered non-viable for human containment applications. I recommended that the Detention Engineering Division open a new classification file for human bioelectric interaction profiles and initiate a full review of lattice chemistry against the dermal conductivity parameters now on record. I noted, in the final line of the report, that the assessment session had lasted 31 minutes and 40 seconds, that the human had spent the majority of it reading, and that the containment field had not lasted as long as she had. The Detention Engineering Division acknowledged receipt 3 days later. The new classification file, as of my last inquiry, remains open. No revised containment architecture has been approved. In the meantime, Carrier, Mara has been assigned to a gravity hold unit on the upper block. She receives printed documents on request. She has not attempted to leave. She hasn't needed to.